My name is Emily, and I am 32 years old. What I am about to tell you is a story about family, betrayal, and how sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most can be the ones who hurt you the deepest. It is a story that culminates in a moment so utterly bizarre, so perfectly ironic, that even now, years later, I still sometimes have trouble fully processing it. My own father stood in front of me and other members of my family and loudly, dramatically announced that I was disowned, that I was no longer his daughter. And then what happened next was even worse. And also, somehow, a strange kind of twisted justice. Stick around, and I will tell you the full story, every painful detail. Before I dive in, though, I am curious. Where in the world are you listening from right now? Let me know in the comments below. And if you have ever felt excluded or betrayed by someone you loved, please hit that like button so I know I am not alone. Also, do not forget to subscribe if you want to hear more stories like this one. My childhood felt, for a long time, like a carefully constructed facade. From the outside, we were the perfect family. My father, Robert, was a successful, respected businessman in our small town. My mother, Susan, was the elegant, supportive wife, active in local charities. I had two older siblings, my brother Thomas and my sister Sarah. On the surface, everything was polished and serene. But behind closed doors, there was a constant undercurrent of tension, a subtle but pervasive toxicity that I only truly understood years later. My father ruled our household with an iron fist, though he preferred to call it benevolent guidance. Every decision, big or small, had to go through him. His opinion was law, his moods dictated the atmosphere in the house. He had a quick temper, a tendency to hold grudges, and an absolute need to be seen as right, always. My mother was beautiful and kind, but she was also incredibly passive. She rarely challenged my father, often smoothing things over or silently accepting his pronouncements, even when they seemed unfair. I remember, even as a very young child, feeling like I had to walk on eggshells, carefully choosing my words and actions to avoid triggering his displeasure. Thomas and Sarah, being older, seemed to have learned the game better than I did, or perhaps they were simply more willing to play it. They knew how to appease him, how to stay on his good side. I, on the other hand, was always a bit more rebellious, more outspoken. I questioned things. I challenged his logic, usually gently at first, but even that was often met with swift, cold disapproval. He valued obedience and conformity above all else. My independent streak was, from the beginning, a source of friction between us. Growing up, my father made it clear that his love and approval were conditional. They were tied to achieving what he defined as success, good grades in the right subjects, choosing a respectable career path, preferably one that aligned with his expectations, and generally presenting a life that reflected well on him. Thomas and Sarah seemed to slot into this mold more easily. Thomas was naturally academic and followed my father into a business-related field. Sarah was beautiful and pursued a safe, conventional path, marrying young to a man my father approved of. I was different. I was more creative, more drawn to the arts and humanities. When it came time to choose a university degree, I wanted to study English literature and possibly pursue a career in writing or publishing. This was met with immediate and vocal opposition from my father. Writing, he scoffed, sitting at the head of the long mahogany dining table, the afternoon sun streaming in, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. My mother sat beside him, silent, her eyes flicking between him and me. Thomas and Sarah were also there, listening intently. This was a family council, called to discuss my future. What kind of future is that, Emily? Starving in a garret? You need a practical degree, something that will get you a real job, a stable income. But Dad, I argued, my voice trembling slightly, it's what I am passionate about. I am good at it. I can make a living doing something I love. There are jobs in publishing, in communications. He cut me off with a sharp wave of his hand. Those are hobbies, Emily, not careers. You will study law, or perhaps business like Thomas. Something respectable, something that provides security. I will not pay for you to waste 4 years on poetry and novels. That was the first major battle, and I lost. Completely. He held all the power, all the financial control. I desperately wanted to go to university, to get away, to build my own life. I ended up compromising, choosing a double major in English and communications, telling him I would focus on the communications aspect, which sounded more practical to him. Even then, the tension remained. He funded my education, but it always felt like a transaction, a loan he held over my head, rather than a gift. His calls and visits often involved checking on my grades, questioning my course choices, and subtly, or not so subtly, steering me towards subjects he deemed more valuable. University was my first taste of true independence, my first opportunity to form my own opinions and choose my own friends away from his influence. It was liberating, but the guilt and pressure from home were ever present. My relationship with my father became more strained. Our conversations were often terse, ending in frustration or silent resentment. He disapproved of my friends, my independent lifestyle, anything that deviated from his rigid expectations. After graduation, I found a job in a small publishing house. It was not glamorous and it did not make me rich, but I loved the work. It was fulfilling. My father, however, saw it as proof that I had defied him, that I was choosing a path beneath my potential, beneath his standing. He would make snide remarks about my salary, about the unstable nature of the industry. He would compare me unfavorably to Thomas, who was quickly climbing the corporate ladder, and Sarah, who was settling into married life and talking about starting a family. The rift between us widened. It was not one dramatic event, but a slow, painful erosion. Every choice I made that was authentically me felt like a challenge to his authority, a deliberate act of rebellion in his eyes. My decision to live in a city rather than return to our hometown, my choice of partner, David, a kind, supportive musician who was definitely not the wealthy professional my father envisioned, my dedication to a career I loved over pursuing more lucrative options. Each step solidified his perception of me as a disappointment. My mother remained in her passive role. She would sometimes call me, her voice laced with worry, urging me to just try to get along with your father, to make him happy. She never outright defended him, but she never defended me either. Her silence felt like complicity. Thomas and Sarah mostly stayed out of it, maintaining their own relationships with our parents, careful not to rock the boat. They had their own lives, their own pressures, and perhaps they simply did not want to risk their own standing by taking sides. I understood it, intellectually, but it still hurt, feeling so isolated within my own family. The conflict came to a head gradually over several years, fueled by a series of escalating incidents. There was the time my father refused to meet David, simply stating he didn't approve of his profession. There was the Christmas where he barely spoke to me, instead lavishing attention on Thomas's new car and Sarah's upcoming trip with her husband. There was the constant, thinly veiled criticism in his phone calls. Still working at that little place? Have you considered getting a real job yet? When are you going to settle down properly? I tried for a long time to mend things. I would send thoughtful gifts for birthdays and holidays, call regularly, though our conversations were often strained, and even bite my tongue during his critical remarks. I craved his approval, his love. It is a powerful, primal need, wanting your parents' acceptance, even when they are flawed. I kept hoping he would change, that he would see me, truly see me, for who I was and be proud. But he never did. He seemed determined to mold me into the daughter he wanted, and when I resisted, he simply withdrew his affection and support, leaving me feeling like a project that had failed. The specific catalyst for the final, public breaking point was something relatively small, yet it exposed the rotten core of our dynamic. My grandmother, my mother's mother, had passed away about a year prior. She had been a lovely woman, quiet but strong, and she had always been supportive of my creative interests. She had left a small, specific bequest in her will for each of her grandchildren. It was not a large sum of money, but it was meaningful, specifically designated, according to the will, for the pursuit of personal interests and passions. My grandmother's will was straightforward and handled by an independent executor, a professional solicitor. I received my portion directly, as did Thomas and Sarah. I decided to use part of the money to fund a writing retreat I had always dreamed of attending. It was an investment in my passion, exactly as my grandmother had intended. When I mentioned this to my father during a phone call, perhaps foolishly, still seeking some kind of positive engagement, his reaction was explosive. "A writing retreat?" He roared down the phone line. "You are spending that money on a frivolous holiday? That money was meant to be used wisely, Emily, for your future." "Dad, grandmother specifically said it was for our passions," I explained patiently, trying to keep my voice calm.
"This is my passion."
"It is an investment in my skills, in my career." "It is a waste," he shouted. "Thomas put his towards a deposit on a sensible property. Sarah is saving hers for her children's education. And you are frittering it away on nonsense. Just more proof that you cannot handle money, that you cannot make responsible decisions." The conversation devolved from there. He brought up every grievance he had ever held against me. My career choice, my relationship with David, my independent lifestyle, my refusal to conform. It was relentless, a torrent of criticism and disapproval. I finally snapped. "You know what, Dad?" I said, my voice trembling with years of suppressed frustration and hurt. "Maybe I'm tired of trying to live up to your impossible standards. Maybe my passions, my choices, are valid, even if they do not fit into your perfect little box. Grandmother understood that. Why can't you?" His silence on the other end was deafening for a moment. Then his voice was dangerously low, cutting. "You think you know better than me? You think you are so clever? You are nothing but a spoiled, ungrateful child. I have provided for you, given you opportunities, and this is how you repay me? Defiance and foolishness." "It is not foolishness. It is my life." "Not while you are beholden to me," he retorted. "But perhaps you do not want to be. Perhaps you want to be truly independent, living your bohemian life.
Fine.
See how far it gets you." He hung up. That was the phone call that changed everything. After that, the calls stopped. My texts went unanswered. My mother would occasionally text me, brief, non-committal messages, avoiding any mention of my father. Thomas and Sarah remained distant. It felt like I had been officially cut off, excommunicated from the family unit. The silence was devastating. It confirmed my deepest fear, that his love was entirely conditional, and I had finally failed the test. I spent weeks in a haze of pain and confusion, replaying every conversation, wondering where I had gone wrong, if I could have done anything differently. I felt like a failure, rejected by my own flesh and blood. David was incredibly supportive during this time. He listened patiently, held me while I cried, and gently reminded me of my worth, independent of my father's opinion. My friends rallied around me, offering distractions, comfort, and validation. They saw my father's behavior for what it was, controlling and cruel. Their support was a lifeline. This period of isolation, though painful, forced me to confront the reality of my relationship with my father and my family. I began to see a therapist who helped me understand the dynamics of toxic family systems, the concept of emotional manipulation, and the importance of setting boundaries. It was a slow, difficult process of peeling back layers of ingrained beliefs and expectations. I started to understand that his behavior was not a reflection of my worth, but a reflection of his own issues, his need for control, his fear of deviation, his inability to accept others for who they truly were. The therapist helped me shift my focus from trying to win his approval to focusing on my own well-being. She encouraged me to define what a healthy relationship looked like and to recognize that the one I had with my father was far from it. Setting boundaries was terrifying, especially with someone who had never respected them. It meant accepting that trying to maintain a relationship on his terms was detrimental to my mental health. It meant letting go of the fantasy of the father-daughter relationship I had always craved. Months passed. The silence from my family continued. Birthdays came and went without a call. It hurt less with each passing week, replaced by a growing sense of quiet resolve. I was building a life for myself, a life filled with people who appreciated me for who I was. I was thriving in my job, My relationship with David was strong and loving, and I was finally feeling confident in my own skin. I realized I did not need my father's approval to be happy or successful. Then came the letter. It arrived by registered mail, a formal envelope with the logo of a prominent law firm in our town. My heart sank. I immediately assumed it was something negative, something related to my father. Had he found some legal way to cause trouble for me? Was he demanding repayment for my education? My hands trembled as I opened it. The letter stated that a family meeting was being convened at the law firm's offices the following week regarding matters pertaining to family assets and inheritance. My siblings were also invited. It was signed by a senior partner, Mr. Harrison. Inheritance? My grandmother's small bequest was the only inheritance I knew about. What else could there be? My father was still alive and, to my knowledge, healthy. Why a meeting about inheritance now? It made no sense. I called David, my voice shaky. I got this weird letter. I explained, reading him the relevant parts. A family meeting. About inheritance? What do you think it means? David was calmer than me. It sounds formal, he said. Maybe it has something to do with your grandmother's estate that wasn't finalized? Or maybe your father is doing some estate planning and wants to inform everyone. It is probably nothing dramatic. He tried to reassure me, but a knot of anxiety formed in my stomach. Given the total lack of contact, this sudden, formal summons felt ominous. I considered ignoring it, but the word inheritance intrigued me, and a small part of me, the part that still held onto a sliver of hope or perhaps just morbid curiosity, wanted to know what was going on. Maybe, just maybe, this was an attempt at reconciliation, a formal setting where we could talk things out. Though, knowing my father, that seemed highly unlikely. I decided to go. I responded to the law firm, confirming my attendance. I did not tell my father or siblings I would be there. I did not want to give my father the opportunity to prevent me from coming or to create a scene beforehand. The day of the meeting arrived. I dressed conservatively, wanting to appear serious and composed. David offered to come with me, but I felt I needed to face this alone. It was a family matter, however dysfunctional the family was. He drove me to the law firm's building downtown. The building was imposing, all glass and steel, the law firm's offices on the top floor, overlooking the city. I checked in at the reception desk, and the receptionist, a stern-faced woman, directed me to a large conference room. As I walked down the hallway, I could hear voices. My heart started to pound. I pushed open the heavy door and stepped inside. The room was large and corporate, with a long polished table dominating the center. Seated around it were my father, my mother, Thomas, and Sarah, and a man in a suit, presumably Mr. Harrison, the solicitor. My entrance stopped the conversation cold. Every head turned towards me. My father's eyes narrowed, a look of pure shock and anger crossing his face. My mother looked startled, then quickly looked away. Thomas and Sarah looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats. Mr. Harrison, the solicitor, was the only one who offered a polite, if reserved, nod. Silence stretched for an agonizing moment. My father was the first to speak, his voice low and dangerous. "Emily, what are you doing here?" I walked towards the table, trying to project confidence I did not feel. "I received a letter from Mr. Harrison," I said, my voice steady despite my pounding heart. It said there was a family meeting regarding assets and inheritance. As a member of the family, I assumed I should be here. My father leaned forward, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "You are not a member of this family anymore, Emily," he spat, his voice rising. "I made that clear. You are disowned. You have chosen your path, your passions over your family. You are nothing to me now. Your name should not have been on that letter." The air in the room crackled with tension. My father's words hit me like a physical blow, even though I had heard them before, or variations of them in private. Hearing them said aloud, in front of his lawyer and my siblings, was a new level of public humiliation. It felt like a performance, a final, dramatic act of rejection. His face was red, his eyes blazing with fury. He looked like he might lunge across the table at me. My mother flinched, her hand going to her mouth, but she said nothing. Thomas and Sarah looked down at the table, avoiding eye contact. They were witnessing it, this ultimate act of disowning, and their silence was deafening. It confirmed that they were on his side, or at least unwilling to stand against him. For a moment, I just stood there, frozen, absorbing the impact of his words. The pain was sharp, but beneath it, a different feeling began to stir, a sense of indignant clarity. He wanted to hurt me, to cut me down in front of everyone. But his words held no real power over me anymore. He had already withdrawn his love and support months ago. This was just him formalizing it, making a spectacle of it. I took a deep breath, and something inside me shifted. The years of therapy, the slow process of building my self-worth, kicked in. I would not let him break me here. I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing me cry or crumble. Disowned, I repeated, my voice surprisingly calm, cutting through the tension. Because I did not live the life you wanted me to live? Because I chose a career I love and a partner who is kind? Is that all it takes to be cast out? I looked at my mother, at Thomas, at Sarah. Do you all agree with this? Silence. Their eyes remained fixed on the table or darted nervously around the room. Robert, the solicitor, Mr. Harrison, said, his voice calm and measured, cutting through the emotional storm. While I understand this is a difficult family matter, we are here to discuss a specific legal issue. Emily is here because she is a named beneficiary. My father rounded on the solicitor. She was a named beneficiary. I am telling you, she is not anymore. I want her removed from everything. My will, any trusts, everything. She gets nothing from me. Mr. Harrison remained impassive. With respect, Robert, that is your prerogative regarding your own estate planning. However, the matter we are discussing today pertains to the estate of your late father, Charles Robert Thompson Sr. My grandfather. My paternal grandfather. He had passed away several years ago, long before the major rift with my father. I had loved him dearly. He had been a quiet, kind man, a stark contrast to his son. He had always encouraged my reading and writing. I had attended his funeral, of course, and understood that his estate had been settled years ago, primarily passing to my father as the only son. My father's estate? My father sputtered, looking confused and slightly panicked. What about his estate? That was settled years ago. Parts of it were, Mr. Harrison confirmed, opening a file in front of him. However, your father, Charles Sr., established a trust before his passing. A significant trust, with specific instructions for distribution. My father frowned, his bluster momentarily forgotten. A trust? What are you talking about? He left everything to me. Not entirely, Mr. Harrison said, adjusting his spectacles. He created a testamentary trust within his will. It was designed to come into effect upon certain conditions being met. One of those conditions was a period of 10 years following his death, which has now passed. The trust names his grandchildren, Thomas, Sarah, and Emily, as direct and equal beneficiaries. This trust was funded with specific assets, primarily several commercial properties downtown that have significantly appreciated in value over the past decade. He paused, letting the information sink in. My father looked stunned, his mouth slightly open. My siblings finally looked up, exchanging surprised glances. I was speechless. My grandfather, bless his heart, had created a secret trust, knowing perhaps his son's controlling nature, ensuring that his grandchildren would receive something directly from him, something outside of my father's control. The words significantly appreciated in value echoed in my mind. This is impossible, my father stammered. I would have known about this. My father told me everything. Your father was a very private man regarding certain financial matters, Mr. Harrison said gently. The trust was established legally and is undeniable. My firm has been the trustee since its inception. Now that the 10-year condition has been met, the trust is to be dissolved and the assets distributed equally among the named beneficiaries. He turned slightly towards me. Mr. Thompson Sr. was quite specific about the distributions to his grandchildren. He wished for them to receive their inheritance directly and without any encumbrance or conditions from their parents. He included clauses to protect the beneficiary's interests. A slow, dawning realization spread across my father's face. He had been so focused on controlling his own money, his own inheritance from his father, that he had either overlooked or been genuinely unaware of this specific trust, hidden away with a legal firm appointed as trustee, designed to bypass him entirely. The very wealth he derived from his father was now, ironically, the source of my independence from him. His face, moments ago contorted with rage at my presence, now paled. He understood the implications. This was not his money to withhold. This was my grandfather's legacy, legally protected, going directly to me. The total value of the trust assets, after accounting for taxes and legal fees associated with the dissolution, Mr. Harrison continued, pulling a few documents from his file, amounts to
a considerable sum.
Divided equally among the 3 grandchildren, the distribution to each beneficiary is substantial. He did not state the exact amount aloud, but he had a document in his hand. He looked at Thomas, then Sarah, handing each of them a sealed envelope. Their eyes widened as they opened them and read the figures inside. Then he turned to me. "Emily," he said, his voice neutral. "As a named beneficiary, you are entitled to 1/3 of the trust's value. Here is the documentation outlining the assets and the distribution plan. And here," he reached into a briefcase next to him, "is the settlement check for your portion, representing the cash equivalent of your inheritance from your grandfather's trust." He reached across the table and handed me a standard bank check, along with a thick folder of legal documents.
The check.
My father had just finished dramatically disowning me, declaring me cut off, nothing to him, unworthy of his family's name or wealth. And literally seconds later, his own lawyer, in front of him and my siblings, handed me a check for a significant sum of money that came from his father's estate, money he had no control over, money that was now undeniably mine. The irony was so profound, so utterly perfect, that I felt a strange, almost dizzying sensation. It was vindication, delivered not by my father's admission of wrong, but by my grandfather's foresight and a legal document. I took the check and the folder, my hand steady now. The piece of paper felt incredibly heavy. I looked at my father. His face was a mask of disbelief and fury. He looked utterly defeated, his grand pronouncement of disowning me rendered completely impotent by this unexpected turn of events. He had tried to strip me of my identity, my connection to the family, and my potential inheritance, only to watch as a significant inheritance arrived from a source he could not control, solidifying my independence in a way he had never imagined. "This is outrageous," he finally exploded, his voice trembling. "My father had no right. This should be mine." Mr. Harrison calmly stated, "Robert, your father had every right to dispose of his assets as he saw fit. The trust is legally binding." My father seemed unable to process it. He had planned to cut me off, to make me feel the consequences of my disobedience, perhaps hoping I would come crawling back, begging for his approval and financial support. This check eliminated any possibility of that. It gave me the financial security he always said I needed, but on my terms, from a source he could not dictate. It was the ultimate checkmate. I looked at my siblings. Thomas looked uncomfortable, avoiding my gaze. Sarah looked thoughtful. Perhaps she saw the injustice of it, or perhaps she was just surprised by the amount of money. My mother still looked pale and distressed, caught between her husband's fury and the undeniable reality unfolding before her. I felt a surge of power, quiet but potent. Not the power of wealth itself, but the power of independence, the power of not needing anything from the man who had tried to break me. He had stripped me of my family connection, yes, but in doing so, he had ironically cleared the path for me to receive something far more valuable in that moment: freedom. I sat down at the table, placing the check and the folder in front of me. Mr. Harrison proceeded to explain the details of the trust distribution, the timeline for the funds transfer, and answered questions from Thomas and Sarah, who seemed focused on the practicalities of the money. My father sat in stunned silence, occasionally muttering under his breath, his fury simmering just below the surface.
He did not look at me.
When Mr. Harrison finished his explanation, he gathered his papers. "That concludes the formal part of this meeting," he announced. "The funds will be transferred to the respective accounts within the next few business days. My office will be in touch regarding any further formalities." He stood up, and that was the signal for the meeting to end. Thomas and Sarah quickly gathered their envelopes and stood up as well. Thomas mumbled something about having another appointment and practically rushed out of the room. Sarah hesitated for a moment, looking at me with an unreadable expression, then followed Thomas. My mother finally looked at me, a flicker of something in her eyes, pity, regret, before she, too, stood and followed my father, who was already halfway out the door, not saying another word to me. I was left alone in the large conference room with Mr. Harrison. He gave me a small, almost sympathetic smile. "A complex situation, Emily," he said quietly. "That is an understatement, Mr. Harrison," I replied, a wry smile touching my lips despite the turmoil inside me. "Your grandfather was a wise man," he added. "He cared very much for his grandchildren's future, perhaps foreseeing potential complications. We handled the final administrative details quickly. He confirmed my bank details for the transfer and explained the next steps. As I was leaving, he offered a final piece of advice, unrelated to the legal matters. "Sometimes," he said, looking thoughtfully, "the greatest freedom comes from realizing you do not need someone's approval to stand on your own 2 feet." I thanked him, clutching the check and the folder. Walking out of that law firm felt surreal. The city outside seemed brighter, the air fresher. I had walked in fearing another confrontation, another rejection. I had walked out having been publicly disowned, yes, but also with unexpected financial independence and a profound sense of vindication. My father's attempt to strip me bare had backfired spectacularly, proving not my worthlessness, but his own lack of control over life's unpredictable turns. I called David from the street. "You will not believe what just happened," I said, my voice a mixture of shock, relief, and a strange kind of triumph. Telling him the story felt like recounting a movie plot. The dramatic disowning, the lawyer's calm interjection, the revelation of the secret trust, and the check being handed over right in front of my father's furious face. David was stunned. He was overjoyed for me, recognizing the significance of the financial freedom, but also heartbroken by the way my father had treated me. The money did change things, of course. It provided a cushion, a sense of security I had never had before. I could continue working in the publishing industry, pursuing my passion, without the constant worry about finances that had always been a subtle leverage point for my father. I could make choices based on what was right for me, not based on earning potential or conforming to someone else's expectations. It reinforced the boundaries I had already started to build. I no longer needed anything from him, not financially, and more importantly, not emotionally. The immediate aftermath with my family was complicated. My father remained furious and refused any contact. He saw the inheritance as a personal insult, a betrayal by his own father, and another act of defiance from me, even though I had nothing to do with its timing or existence. He couldn't rage at his deceased father or the impenetrable legal trust, so his anger was directed squarely at me. My mother occasionally reached out, tentatively, cautiously. She didn't mention the meeting or the money directly at first. Her calls were about neutral topics, the weather, a distant relative's health. I kept the conversations light and brief. The dynamic had changed irrevocably. I no longer sought her validation or tried to make her understand. I had seen her stand by silently while my father publicly disowned me. That silence spoke volumes. I was cordial but distant. Thomas and Sarah were also awkward. Thomas sent me a brief email, acknowledging the inheritance and saying something vague about keeping in touch. Sarah was slightly more direct. She called me a few weeks later. "Emily," she started, her voice hesitant. "Listen about that meeting. Dad was way out of line. What he said. It was awful." "It was who he is, Sarah," I replied, matter-of-factly. He finally just said the quiet part out loud, in front of witnesses. Yeah, I know, she sighed. It was hard to watch.
We.
Thomas and we didn't know what to say. He was so angry. Your silence spoke volumes too, I said gently but firmly. Standing by and saying nothing when someone is being treated like that. It is a choice. I know, she admitted. We're sorry, Emily. It was just. We didn't want to make things worse. Worse for who, Sarah? I asked. For Dad? Or for you and Thomas? Because it couldn't get much worse for me in that moment. The conversation was difficult, raw. Sarah acknowledged that they had often appeased my father to keep the peace, and that she now saw how damaging that had been, for all of us. She admitted that seeing the trust revealed and my father's reaction had been eye-opening for her. She saw that his need for control extended even beyond the grave of his own father, and that his anger at me was not just about my life choices, but about his own perceived loss of power. We did not instantly reconcile and become the closest of siblings. Years of complex family dynamics and individual choices had created distance. But that conversation was a starting point. It was the first time one of my siblings had acknowledged the reality of my father's behavior and my experience. It opened the door, just a crack, for a different kind of relationship with Sarah, one based on a shared understanding of the past, rather than pretending it did not happen. Thomas remained more distant, preferring to avoid conflict, which meant he also avoided deeper connection. My relationship with my father never recovered. The disowning and the subsequent financial revelation were the definitive end. He could not tolerate the fact that I was independent and thriving without his input or control, especially not with money that came from his family. He never reached out again, and I stopped trying. The pain of his rejection was still there, a scar, but it no longer defined me. I had grieved the relationship I wanted and accepted the reality of the relationship I had. The inheritance allowed me to fully embrace my independence, removing the last potential lever of control he had over me. It was a final, ironic twist of fate. The money itself was important, providing security and options. I used some of it to buy a small apartment, giving me a true sense of ownership and stability. I continued to work in publishing, eventually moving into a more senior role. I invested wisely, ensuring my future was secure. But the greatest value of that unexpected inheritance was the tangible proof that I did not need my father's approval or financial support to build a successful and happy life. My grandfather, in his quiet wisdom, had given me not just money, but the means to truly be free. Looking back now, I see the entire episode with a mix of sadness and strength. It is sad that a family relationship can break so completely, driven by one person's need for control and inability to accept others. It is sad that my mother, Thomas, and Sarah were so caught up in the dynamic that they struggled to offer support or challenge the status quo, though I understand the complexities of their positions better now. But I also feel immense strength. I survived it. I navigated the pain, set boundaries, and built a life I love, surrounded by people who value me for who I am. The public disowning was intended to be a moment of ultimate humiliation and powerlessness for me. Instead, it was immediately followed by a moment that demonstrated my unexpected power and independence. It was a harsh lesson, learned in a lawyer's office with an audience, but it solidified my path forward. I learned that you cannot force someone to see your worth. You cannot reason with manipulation. And sometimes, letting go of the hope for a healthy relationship is the only way to protect yourself and find your own happiness. My father wanted to erase me from his life, but in doing so, he ironically paved the way for me to receive the very thing he tried to withhold, security and freedom, from a source beyond his reach. It was a strange, painful, and ultimately liberating twist of fate. Thank you for listening to my story. It was difficult to share, but I hope it resonates with someone out there. If you have ever had to stand up to family members or navigate toxic dynamics, please share your experience in the comments below. Your stories help others feel less alone. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button. And if you have not already, do not forget to subscribe for more stories about navigating difficult relationships and finding your voice. Speaking your truth, even when it is painful, is an incredibly powerful act. Always believe in your own worth, independent of anyone else's opinion.